Hi, it's Helen Tarrant. Welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. Now, you might be thinking, what about insurance? Now, one of the questions I get asked is what happens when I've got a property and I'm ready to settle and the bank asks for this certificate of currency? What is that in commercial property? So for some of you, you might have a strata property. For some of you might have a freestanding property. So what's the difference? Now, you might be thinking, oh, I just get building insurance. Now, that's really just, your run-of-the-mill building insurance. But no, not all commercial property insurance are the same. So I'm just having a quick run through about what commercial property insurance is. So number one, if you're buying a strata property, so a property that's under body corporate and it's managed under body corporate, what you'll find is that the body corporate actually takes out the building insurance for the whole building. So you don't have to worry about building insurance. It's built into your admin fees, and or you could be charged an additional levy for insurance. And if your tenants are paying outgoings, that's something that they pay for as well. But some of the insurance that the body corporate take out is for the building, but what they don't cover is the internals of your property. So you might have an office space or a warehouse, and internally there may be a kitchenette, there may be a bathroom, there might be some light fittings, there also may be some properties in there that belongs to you that in case it breaks, so you might put in some equipment, you might put some aircon in, you might put some things in that if it was damaged, it might cost you thousands and thousands of dollars to replace. So if that is the case, then you may want to get content insurance on top of that to cover yourself, but it is not essential, and normally they only cost a couple of $1,000s in terms of replacing them, and they don't happen all the time, and they often happen once in a little while. So therefore it's really up to you whether you want to take that out or not. The next lot of insurance that you might want to consider if you have a freestanding building, so that's a whole building you own on your own, is actually building insurance itself. So if you own a freestanding building, you have to take out the building insurance, and this is one of the tips I have to tell you, is that even if your tenant is responsible for paying all the outgoings, including the actual building insurance, you want to take it out in your own name and then get your tenant to reimburse you, rather than put it in your tenant's name and get your tenants to pay for it and then just trusting them to do it, because you want to make sure you have that control process, because ultimately it's your building and you want it to be protected. The other thing to think about is whether you need loss of rent insurance. Now, people ask me about how in residential, they ask me about that they have what they call a tenant default, or they have what they call a landlord insurance, and whether they need something similar in the commercial property space. Now, commercial property space don't have landlord insurance, because what happens if your tenant defaults or damages your property is actually inbuilt into the lease, and because it's inbuilt into the lease, your tenant has absolutely responsibility for it, and you can actually sue them for it. And of course, it's made out in the lease that you can actually charge them for all the costs associated with fixing it up as well. So what happens with that is that if you wanted and worried about your tenant defaulting on the actual lease, is that you can take out what we call a rent default insurance. It's an additional insurance on top of your building and content insurance, and on top of any other insurance you have for the building. Your tenant, even if they pay for insurance, is not liable for that insurance. So it's really out of pocket expenses for you, and if you decide to get that, that's entirely up to you. Now, you have to make a balance of probability when your tenant comes into the property to see if that's something you want, and normally your tenant has to be paid up to date for the insurance company to take that up. Now, during the COVID period and special periods like this, it does not apply. So your tenant, they will not cover you for that. But in any other period leading up to COVID, now passing COVID, the insurance company will absolutely give you loss of rent insurance. The other insurance that's worthwhile thinking about is they ask you about business interruption. Now, business interruption is often the policy that your tenant actually takes out. And what that is actually a proper about what happens if there's an act of God. So say a truck comes in and runs into your premise, say that you have a flooding, say that you have a cyclone, and it takes off the roof of your property and it damages your tenants' internals so that they cannot operate anymore. So if they cannot operate, what will happen is that they have this business interruption, and often tenants get it as part of their business insurance rather than you. And what that means is that the business interruption will continue to pay the rent and continue to pay through some of the key expenses in the business while they're trying to rectify the property. But of course, if that does happen to your property, your building insurance will cover it. Your building insurance will go in and replace the roof, and they'll replace everything. And during that time, they may also cover you for some of that lost rent as well. So it depends on what you include. So really, the best way in commercial property to find out what's best for you, and because of the tenant you have in there, different insurance companies will have different ways of insuring your property, and they have different premiums, and they've got asked lots of questions. Some of them will ask questions like, what's your next door neighbors? Are they a restaurant premise? Do they have a deep fryer? Is there asbestos in the building? Is there a mezzanine floor? If it is it approved? Office spaces, what kind of layout did you put in there? What kind of kitchen did you put in there? They find out all this information before they give you proper insurance. Also, if your tenants are storing stock in there, what kind of stock is there? So they're going to ask you a lot of information. Often we give them the pest and building report, or often we give them any strata information so that they can make a correct judgment on how to insure your property. So each and every one is different, and this is the key thing. This is where you actually need to speak to an insurance broker rather than just calling up an insurance company like CGU or Amy, and they will actually walk you through the process and find out for you exactly what you need to insure, because you don't want to double insure what your tenant's already insured, but you also don't want to pay over the top for what you've insured. So there's areas like flood insurance. Do you really need flood insurance if you're in 1 in a 100-year flood zone, or that if the area has not been flooded but is part of a flood zone? What about bushfire prone, sorry. So it means that there's a whole range of things you need to get possible insurance for, but some of them you may not, depending on the location of your property, the age of your property, and also the make of your property. So the type of roof, the kind of construction, the kind of materials it is. So there's lots of variety. So my biggest thing is, after I've given you those 3 tips to look into, is to go and contact an insurance broker. Aon is who we use. They're Australia-wide. They can quote and pretty much show you 2 or 3 different insurers who will insure you, and they'll give you the correct advice moving forward. Now, for me personally, just consider those 3 things. Firstly, do you need content insurance? So if you are a strata, do you need content insurance for what's internal? Or do you have enough money set aside, a couple of $1,000s, if you need to replace the carpet or the blinds or maybe the aircon? And number 2, when you have a freestanding building and you have building insurance, do you need loss of rent? Now, loss of rent would apply to a strata property as well as a freestanding property, because it applies to your tenant. Do you need loss of rent insurance? Now, that's entirely up to you and is out of your own pocket, and it depends on how much your tenant is paying and the type of tenant they are and the tenant history. There would be a different premium applied to that. And thirdly, things like flood insurance, being in a bushfire, and any of these additional insurances that you need to get, do you really need them? Is based on some of the zoning, based on what the previous vendor has. Often I get a previous vendor insurance policy, I match it up, try to see what I currently would need compared to what they have been getting. And sometimes they're underinsured, sometimes they're overinsured. So really look at that and seeing what of the extras do you need, like business interruption, flood, all of these things, and then make a decision, because they're all going to impact on the price of your premium as well. I also tend to make my excess higher because in the unlikely event that these things happen, and most of the time it's a big disaster if it happens, and that's like a roof or flooding, or the property totally being broken down because something ran into it. Unless it's some of those things, I'm not likely to claim on some of the minor things. So I like to keep my excess high and my insurance premium low. So I hope those things have helped you into understanding a bit more about commercial property. There's plenty of tips coming up, and if you want to find out more, reach out to me at helentarrant.com, or I've got a free masterclass you can attend. The link is below, and in the meantime, click on the link, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next episode. Bye for now.